Baby Island, Chapter 4, Bananas. After her troubled night, Mary slept late the next morning. When she woke at last, the sun was shining brightly. It dazzled her for a moment, and she couldn't think where she was. Something strange had been happening to her for the last few days, but she couldn't quite remember. Then, somewhere in the distance, she heard Jean singing one of her made-up songs, and somebody was tugging at her sleeve. She opened her eyes wider and found herself gazing into the earnest, round face of the Pink Twin. Then Mary remembered that she was at sea in a lifeboat with Mrs. Snodgrass's twins. But when the Pink Twin saw her awake, he began to bounce himself up and down with excitement. "Bye-bye, Mimi, bye-bye," he exclaimed. "Darling thing," said Mary, trying to kiss him, "we can't go bye-bye." But he wriggled from her embrace and pointed a dramatic finger, crying, "Bye-bye, Mimi, baby, bye-bye." Suddenly, a tremendous idea flashed into Mary's mind. The boat was no longer moving. She could hear the waves lapping against it, but the boat itself was quite still. With a little cry, she sprang up and gazed about her. To her astonishment, she saw that they were safely lodged on a sandy shore, just at the edge of the dancing, sparkling waves. She could see a long stretch of shining sand, then a fringe of graceful palm trees and vegetation. Running in and out among the first of these trees, she could see Jean, gleefully capering, shouting, and singing. Mary sat down again, perfectly flabbergasted. "Well," she gasped, "we got here." And then she added fervently, "Oh, thank you, Lord." Anne Elizabeth and Jonah were still asleep. The Blue Twin had clambered over the side of the boat and was toddling after Jean. The Pink Twin still pulled at Mary's skirt and cried, "Bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye." "Oh, all right, Pink," cried Mary happily. "I don't know how we got here, but we aren't going to let Jean and Elijah beat us. No, sir-ree." Casting a glance at the sleeping baby, she caught Pink up under her arm and ran after the other twin, who had fallen on his nose in the soft sand. "Oh, twinsies," she said, setting them both right side up again. "What a wonderful sand pile. Aren't you the lucky babies?" The twins may not have understood her words, but they understood her happy tone of voice, for they clapped their fat hands and squealed with delight. "Just see," she went on, catching up a handful of sand, "what castles we can make. I guess not even the richest millionaire in America has such a sand pile as this in his backyard for his babies." Pink began digging like a little dog, throwing the sand out behind between his fat legs, and Blue amused himself by pouring sand in his hair and chuckling with delight when it ran tickling down the back of his neck. Just then, Jean came running from the group of trees, shouting at the top of her voice and waving something yellow which she held in her hands. "What is it, Jean?" called Mary, preparing to pick up the babies and run if any danger threatened. "Bananas!" cried Jean, waving her arms as she ran. "Bananas, bananas, bananas! I'm singing hosannas 'cause I found bananas! Bananas, bananas, bananas!" "Really?" asked Mary incredulously. "Really," said Jean, all out of breath, dropping down on the sand beside them. She exhibited half a dozen large, yellow bananas. "The trees are so full of them. Oh, I never hoped to find such a heavenly place on earth. Think of having all the bananas you want to eat. That's almost like picking caramels off bushes." "Oh, yum," said Mary. "I like bananas too." "Nana, Nana!" cried the twins, reaching sandy fingers. Jean distributed the fruit. The twins instantly began to pull off the skins and stuff the ripe fruit in their mouths. "Dear me," said Mary weakly, "I don't know what Mrs. Snodgrass would say. Bananas before breakfast? Isn't that supposed to be terrible for the digestion?" "Oh, let them, just this once," begged Jean. "Today we ought to celebrate because we reached our island." "However did we get here, Jean? Did you see us arrive?" "No, I was asleep too, but I felt a sort of gentle bump and a grating on the sand, and then we stopped moving. And I woke up, and here we were. I sat up and looked around. You and the babies kept right on sleeping as if nothing had happened, and at first I thought maybe I was having one of my nightmares, only it was really too pleasant to be a nightmare. I started to wake you up, and then I thought, gracious, somebody's always yanking me out of a nice cozy sleep, and that makes me cross. I'll let poor Mary sleep it out. We'll probably be here long enough anyway. Well, I was surprised, declared Mary, and I expect you're right about our being here for a long time. It certainly does look like a desert island if I ever saw one. We'll have to begin exploring right after breakfast, and then we'll have to set up housekeeping somewhere. We've got babies to think of, you know. What shall we name our new country? Bananaland? Jean was already beginning on her 5th banana. How about Babyland, suggested Mary. You and I will be king and queen, and all our subjects babies. We do seem to be terribly mixed up with babies, admitted Jean. How about calling this place Baby Island? For, of course, it is an island, or we wouldn't have come bumping into it in the way we did, right out in the middle of the ocean. All right, said Mary. I like that name. Baby Island it shall be. Just then, from the boat, they heard Anne Elizabeth's voice crying for breakfast. Her lusty cry was immediately joined by Jonah's shrill wail, making a sort of alto and soprano duet. Our subjects are calling us, said Mary, starting to run. You're all mixed up, Mary, laughed Jean as she ran to help her sister. We're not the king and queen of Baby Island. We're the slaves. The girls made a hasty breakfast in the boat, for they were both in a hurry to begin exploring. But first of all, there would be a certain amount of housework to be done. There was washing, and the babies all needed baths. First, let's pull the boat up as far on shore as we can, said Mary, so that a sudden wind won't carry it out to sea. We can let the babies roll on the sand until we get that done. So they left the babies rolling and tumbling in the clean sand while they went at the task of pulling the boat ashore. This was hard to do, for the boat was heavy. Bobbing on the open sea, it had often seemed small, but now that they had it on the beach, it seemed as heavy and unwieldy as a dead elephant. But the two girls pulled and pushed with all their strength, working it inch by inch up onto the dry sand. Whew, remarked Jean, wiping the perspiration from her forehead. That was some job. I know, said Mary, and that's not the last hard thing we'll have to do before we leave this island. But we won't let anything beat us, Jean. A Wallace never gives up. No, sir, said Jean. Never. And the two young Wallaces ground their teeth and gave the boat a last triumphant tug. Now we'll make a tent, announced Mary. Searching among the piles of driftwood which lay here and there along the beach, the girls found 2 long sticks and stuck them deep into the sand, a short distance from the boat. To these 2 poles they fastened 2 corners of the tarpaulin which had already been so useful to them in the boat. The other 2 corners were fastened to the side of the boat so that it formed a sort of tent with the sides of the lifeboat as a sheltering wall at the back. At first they had some difficulty in fastening the tarpaulin securely, but by twisting the corners of it around the stakes and using Jean's safety pins to fasten it tightly in place, they managed to get a good, firm anchorage. Maybe that's not the way a seaman would do it, said Mary, sitting back on her heels and admiring the result. But I call that a pretty fine tent. Oh, Mary, so sorry to interrupt you, said Jean, but Aunt Elizabeth is eating sand. Do you suppose we gave her enough breakfast? Oh, Aunt Elizabeth, no, cried Mary, running to the rescue. It's nasty. Pit it out right away. Oh, Jean, get the water jug and we'll wash her mouth out. That dirty baby, and there you go talking baby talk to her, exclaimed Jean disapprovingly. But she fetched the water jug just the same. Aunt Elizabeth seemed to enjoy the sand very much, for she said, "Goo, goo," and reached for more. Poor darling, she doesn't know any better, apologized Mary tenderly as she cleaned the squirming baby's mouth. After washing Aunt Elizabeth's mouth, she picked up the water jug, weighing it carefully in her hands. She tried to peer inside it, but the earthenware neck was too small to allow her to see how much water was left. You know, this water isn't going to last forever, she said dubiously. The next thing we must do is hunt for fresh water, and when we find it, we must build our house near it. Folks can't get along without water. Isn't there a way of using seawater, Mary? No, it's so salty it would just make us thirstier and thirstier. If we can't get fresh water, we'll all die. Oh dear, said Jean. I hate to die now, Mary, just when I've found all the bananas I want to eat. I always did like bananas better than water. Yes, continued Mary, as soon as we can get the babies all asleep for their naps, we must go exploring for a stream of water. It's very important. But first we will give them their baths. Oh, Mary, cried Jean laughingly. The blue twin has already taken his. Just look at him. During the excitement of washing out Aunt Elizabeth's mouth, the blue twin had escaped the girl's watchful eyes and gone down to the sea. There he was splashing and paddling to his heart's content. The beach sloped so gradually into the water that there was no danger, and he squealed with joy as the little frothy ripples splashed over him. The pink twin stood on the shore, clapping his hands at his brother's antics and ready at any moment to plunge in himself. "Wah, wah," he cried happily. "Ba, ba, wah, wah." Mary caught him just before he splashed in beside Elijah. "You hold pink while I dry blue," said Mary. "We must never, never mix them up." "They're so much alike, I don't see what difference it would make if we did mix them up," objected Jean. "Really?" said Mary. "I think that's rather heartless, Jean. It wouldn't somehow be honest to Mrs. Snodgrass to put a pink shirt on Elijah and call him Elisha, or to put a blue shirt on Elisha and call him Elijah, because she intended it the other way around." "Oh, poof," said Jean. But just the same, she knew that Mary was right. Mary stripped Elijah and hung his blue-edged shirt and nightie to dry on the boat. Then she proceeded to give him a bath as well as she could without soap, sponge, or towel. The towel was really not greatly needed because the warm sun so readily dried him. "But I do wish I had a good cape of Castile soap," said Mary, "and a can of talcum powder. I suppose that babies can be raised without the use of talcum powder, but I've never heard of it being done." "This sand is nice and fine," suggested Jean. "Oh, Jean," said Mary in despair, "you can't compare sand with nice baby talcum, ever." "I suppose not," said Jean sadly. When Elijah's blue clothes were dried, he was dressed again, and then Jean undressed the pink twin and let him splash while she and Mary bathed Anne, Elizabeth, and Jonah. The 3 older babies felt so lively after their baths that Jean asked Mary if she might have a circus with them in the new tarpaulin tent. Mary, busy preparing Jonah's milk and getting him ready for his long nap, readily consented. So Jean spread a blanket on the sand under the shelter and crawled up with the 3 babies. At first she played that she was a lion and creeping around, growling and snarling to the great delight of the twins, who pulled her hair and squealed with happiness. They wanted to be lions themselves and growl and tumble about, so Jean turned herself into an elephant and took Aunt Elizabeth riding on her back. It was a very gay and successful circus, and the babies gave the babies such an appetite for dinner that Mary began to wonder how much longer the milk supply was going to hold out. After they had eaten, the fat little things simply toppled over to sleep in a state of happy exhaustion. "Aren't they darling?" cried Jean. Let's just leave them where they are." "No, I think that we better put them in the boat," said Mary. "If anything should happen, they would be better off there." So the girls tucked them in carefully as they could, and with a last anxious look at them, they hurried away on their tour of exploration.